The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
All right, Lieutenant House, December 6th officially marked the day where recreational marijuana in the state became legal. Let's start there with the new law.
Right, so the voters in the state of Michigan decided by quite a little margin that they wanted recreational marijuana to be legal in the state of Michigan. And I've noticed that some people are under the impression that law enforcement wants to fight this or to make it difficult, and that's totally not the case. I mean, it's our job to enforce the laws of the state of Michigan, whatever they might be. In this case, I think the voters have spoken, and they have enacted some laws as a result of that ballot initiative. The big things to remember are that an individual is now able to possess marijuana and use it recreationally. There's a few caveats. Number one,
let's talk about that.
Yeah, number one, you can only have 2.5 ounces on your person, in your possession, transporting in a car at any given time. Another thing is that you can give up to 2.5 ounces away to a friend or whoever you choose. However, more than that could result in a civil infraction or another kind of penalty.
Now, stop right there for a second. I do know that some people will smoke in the car or in their property. Is that the same as someone smoking in public or at their private residence?
Well, the law doesn't specify that, but my common sense tells me that if you're parked on your private property and you happen to be sitting in a car, probably, law enforcement's not going to have any contact with you there anyways. But just like alcohol, if you're parked in a car in an area that's not open to the public, is not a place where motor vehicles would tend to be, you probably don't have an issue. However, I'm kind of forced to make some analogy with the current alcohol law because a lot of this isn't spelled out here. It's going to take some time for case law and for prosecutors to kind of determine what is going to be the best way to enforce these laws and to really hammer out the details of how they're going to be enforced.
So what do we know so far about how officers will enforce, the limit to not go over or pass out more than 2.5 ounces of recreational marijuana?
Well, we really need to stress that the fact is that marijuana is now a legal substance in Michigan. Yes, there is a maximum amount that people can hand out to a friend or whatever the case may be, but it appears that those things will be civil infractions akin to a traffic ticket versus what could have been in the past, for selling drugs or something along those lines, could have been a felony investigation. So we aren't necessarily going to have a case where people are out looking for someone who's giving 2.6 ounces to their friend. I'm sure there will be times when someone reports to us that someone's in violation of the law, has done something wrong or outside of the statute, and at that point we'll handle that like any other criminal investigation.
But looking at road safety, Lieutenant, if we're look at what has taken place in states like Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, where marijuana is legal, research shows that there has been an increase in car accidents in those states, by about 5% than their neighboring states. Do you think we will see something like that here in Michigan, where we will see an increase in car accidents in comparison to Wisconsin, Ohio, and Illinois, now that Michigan is the first state in the Midwest to legalize marijuana recreationally? Right.
Well, I think that that research is interesting, and it certainly opens the door for that possibility here. And the only way for us to know for sure what will happen is to wait and see. But in the interim, it's our job as law enforcement agencies to get in front of that curve as best we can. The implication there is that those accidents might be being caused by people who are operating vehicles while under the influence of marijuana. So the way we can try to battle that that statistic is to make sure our officers are trained in how to properly do the standardized field sobriety tests at the roadside, that we are trained to look for the signs of someone who might be under the influence of marijuana, and that we make sure that we put the time in our day to go out there and enforce those laws.
Now, listen, I've been on a ride-along before, and the officer next to me pulled someone over because they were swerving in and out of the lane, and to him, that was an indication that that individual was under the influence of alcohol, because at the time, marijuana was illegal. So how are officers looking at drivers to see if they're under the influence of marijuana or alcohol? What do those indications or the way the person is driving on the road look like? Are there any patterns?
The actual pattern that the driver is going to show, so if someone is under the influence of marijuana or another drug versus alcohol, to the person who's watching that individual operate the car, there may be no difference. It's going to depend on how much of each substance they have in their system and several other variables. But oftentimes what we're going to see prior to contacting that driver is, erratic driving, moving around in the lane, perhaps just violating other basic traffic laws, not coming to complete stops, making wide turns, those sorts of things. Those are all indicators of some type of impairment. Doesn't mean it's alcohol or marijuana or an illegal drug, but those are all signs of some type of impairment. Once an officer views that type of thing, like your officer did in that case, oftentimes that results in a traffic stop. The next phase of the investigation is that contact with the driver, where the trooper or deputy or local officer has an opportunity to have face-to-face interaction with the driver and start to make some other assumptions as this investigation goes on. There's some other observations. They might see that the person has bloodshot eyes. They might smell something in the car, alcohol, burnt marijuana, something like that. They may see something in the car that indicates another drug use. During their conversation, they also might find that that's totally the opposite. The person was distracted by something. So that's part of that investigation as well. If the officer believes that the person's in fact under the influence of something, then they usually have them step from the car. We're going to try to see if in fact they are being impaired. And we're going to look at different things that are measured by the tests that we do. Okay, so we do sobriety tests. We call them the standardized field sobriety tests. Mm-hmm. They consist of three main things. It's called the first one's called a horizontal gaze nystagmus test. And that's a test of the eyes and some things that take place in the eyes as a result of intoxication by certain substances. Another test we're going to do is a balance test called a one-legged stand. It's not an overly difficult test, but people who are impaired by one of these substances tend to have difficulty with it. The third test we do is called a walk and turn test. Again, another test of balance, and each one of them has certain instructions that have to be followed which help to test the cognitive impairment of an individual.
I just want to start out by saying, recreational marijuana is now legal in the state of Michigan. How will cases be prosecuted now that it's legal? What would that look like?
Well, it's going to look a lot different because simple possession is not going to be prosecuted as a misdemeanor. They're going to be more in the frame of civil infractions, so more like a traffic ticket.
Now, what's the difference between a misdemeanor and a civil infraction for those who don't know?
A civil infraction is not punishable by jail. It's punishable simply by a fine. Obviously, at some point in time, if you continue to fail to pay your fine, you can end up being held in contempt of court. But a misdemeanor is punishable by up to a year in jail. Obviously, for possession of marijuana, that doesn't happen. Hasn't happened for years, but it is something that is punishable by up to a year. So if somebody was put on probation and continued to do poorly on probation, they could spend up to a year in jail. In a situation with a civil infraction, no matter what happens, the only potential incarceration you could ever receive would be if you were held in contempt of court, which is kept at 90 days. But in general, a civil infraction is just merely a fine. A misdemeanor is something where you could end up with potential of jail and or probation.
I read online that some prosecutors in their areas in the state are taking cases where right as Michigan was becoming legal, people had small amounts of marijuana, and those prosecutors were going to drop those cases because it was small and it wasn't worth them going through the process, even though the law would still be on their side because it was illegal leading up to it being legal. What are you going to do about those cases where people have small amounts right before it became legal?
So although we could have held people and gone forward with criminal cases based upon what was decided within the state, we did a case-by-case decision-making process where we would go forward with cases or not go forward with cases based upon what had happened. So we looked at the facts and circumstances. If somebody had a larger amount of marijuana and it looked like they were trying to deal marijuana, that would be something different. If it was something where it was on school property, that would be different. But if it was merely possession and that was the only charge, then we were not going forward on that. Cases where there was a possession charge, where there was other things involved, we might go forward on the possession charge, but generally not. So, long story short, we took it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Now, I know local governments, especially Northeast Michigan, they're banning pot businesses from popping up in their towns. Can you talk to me about what would it take for members of the community to reverse that ban? How long do ordinances like that stand? Walk me through that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the reason why a lot of that happened or is happening is because the local populace overall didn't vote this into place. They did not approve the proposal. With that said, statewide it did get approved. And so what you're seeing is local governments being able to, pursuant to the proposal, opt out. From my review of the statute or the proposal, there has to be, to overturn what the local governments do, individuals can go and do a petition to then put it back on the local ballot to overturn what the local township government or city government decides to do. But it would require 5% of the people that voted in this last governor's race. So, for instance, countywide, there was 12,626 people that voted for governor in the county. So for you to have 5% of those, you'd have to get 5% of those to be on a petition countywide to then get it voted on again. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but essentially
it's kind of like a lot of people.
Yeah, it's 631 people. So you'd have to get 631 people on a petition if it was a countywide. But the county cannot opt out. That only can happen on a township or city basis. So it would just be the electorate in whatever jurisdiction it is. So for instance, if it was Alpena Township, only those people in Alpena Township that voted for governor. You'd have to get 5% of those to then petition. So that's a lot less than 631, but it's still a lot of people.
It is, especially for a small town where a lot of people have already said no. Are the new marijuana laws set in stone? Do you think there needs to be some refinement? Did Michigan look at what Colorado was doing when they became legal?
I guess I can't say as to what the proposal was based off of. I don't know what the considerations were for those individuals that put it into place. Can it be potentially refined? Yes. Is it difficult to do? Yes, because it's a proposal and it was voted on by the entire state. So it would take more than a simple majority to change what the law would be. My personal opinion is that I think it would be better if it was dealt with and sold much like with a liquor license. And you had to do it that way. I have a difficult time with the fact that you can have 10 ounces in your home, which is an awful lot of weed.
What does 10 ounces look like? Can you compare it to anything?
10 ounces, I'd have to show you a photo, but what I can tell you is you're not necessarily, to fit 10 ounces in a backpack would be, you'd have to stuff it in. So I think a lot of times people just, because it's a leaf substance, it's incredibly light. So 10 ounces of a leaf substance is an awful lot. So I guess in answering your question, could there be some changes? Yes. Do I think there'll be some changes eventually? But it's going to take the majority of the legislature to go along with it and to be voted into place. So unfortunately, I think much like the medical marijuana stuff, a lot of it is just we're going to have to deal with some of the bad portions of it because it was voted in by the state as a whole rather than in by the legislature.
Ed, what are some of your worries?
I think my biggest worry is that when people smoke marijuana, a lot of times they don't understand that it impairs their driving. They think that it helps them concentrate and that it's okay. And what they don't understand is marijuana does impact your ability to drive. It impacts something called divided attention. So while you might be able to do the walk and turn or balance, your ability to focus on one thing and still understand that something else is happening is impaired. And that impacts driving hugely because you can have a situation where something happens that's unexpected. So while you can drive in a straight line, when something comes at you that's unexpected, your ability to react to that is impaired. So that's my greatest worry, is that people are going to smoke and think, well, it's legal to smoke, and then get behind the wheel of a car. So that's my biggest concern.
Are there any benefits in your eyes? You talk about some of the things that worry you. Could the town be losing out on the tax increase, making money off of it?
Well, that's all yet to be seen. Medical marijuana won't be taxed under the new law, so if a business doesn't want to deal with the taxes, do they then just incorporate and act like they're a medical marijuana business, or do they go the other route and then end up having to be taxed? You know, who makes sure that they're doing what's right in following through with assessing taxes? Who goes back and checks on them? Overall, I think that the ultimate cost to the state is going to be higher than what the tax revenue is going to be. But I think the benefit, if there is one, is that you don't have people being put in a position where they're losing their licenses for, you know, having possession of marijuana.
And briefly, we're running out of time right now.
But what would you have
to say about ensuring that these drugs aren't getting into the hands of kids? Especially since people can have them in their house and on their person personally.
Right. The whole 10 ounces.
They will still be out there on the streets.
Yeah. No, the biggest concern that I have, and the reason why I think it'd be better if it was dealt with through a license like a liquor license, is because of my concern that it's going to get in the hands of children. Kids under the age of 21 aren't supposed to be able to have this. The reality is that when you have 10 ounces of marijuana and you can have 12 plants in addition to that, and you're allowed to give marijuana away to people, it's going to get in the hands of kids. And we'd all like to believe that parents are good parents, but not all parents have the same beliefs. And so there are some individuals out there that are not going to have a problem with giving their kids a lot of marijuana, and we know that that's going to filter out. So I'm not sure exactly how we're going to be able to prevent that, because you're not going to be allowed into people's homes just to search for marijuana, because they're going to be able to have 12 plants and 10 ounces.
Now, officer, in the state of Michigan, your BAC limit, blood alcohol content, can't be greater than 0.08. Is there a marijuana limit, and how high is too high on the roads?
Good question. So that 0.08 alcohol limit is what we call a per se law. Per se law means that this is something that's been carved out over time as something that we as a community, as a society, believe is too much to have in your system and drive a car. That means that even in the absence of other signs of impairment, just knowing that your blood level is a 0.08 or higher, you could be convicted of driving under the influence of alcohol. With marijuana and other illegal drugs, there's no such thing in place. So if a roadside investigation leads an officer to believe that an individual is under the influence of marijuana, all right, it's not like the blood test that we take is going to say, well, they're over so many nanograms per milliliter, they must be intoxicated.
So what would you guys then use to test for THC in their system?
Well, we have a couple things in place. The thing that we've been using forever is a blood test. When a driver gets their driver's license, they are agreeing to take a chemical test if an officer suspects they might be under the influence of an intoxicating substance. So the officer will take the person in the case of a suspected marijuana or drug intoxication. They'll take the subject to usually a hospital to get a blood draw. That blood is then set in, and the laboratory analysis will tell us what's in their system. In the case of marijuana, that number, it's going to be how much THC, how many nanograms per milliliter are going to come back, and that becomes part of the total picture. It's not like we could say, well, there's 5 or 10 or 3 nanograms per milliliter, they must be impaired. We also need to show through those other things that we do, the field sobriety test, the initial contact, the observation of the driving, we show as the whole picture, this is the evidence that that person is under the influence of marijuana.
Can you touch on A-RIDE training?
Yeah.
You mentioned that.
Yeah, so A-RIDE training is Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement. All right, that's an acronym for a type of training that most, if not all, of our troopers have received, as well as many local officers. It's kind of a next series in a process of sobriety or impaired driving training.
Is it new?
Well, new relatively in the last few years, yes. So we've had the standardized field sobriety test training, which teaches officers how to administer those 3 tests we discussed. Then the next step is A-RIDE training, and it's a longer training where the officers learn about how different drugs and the components of those drugs can specifically affect an individual and their ability to drive.
Now, how long is that training?
You know what, I'm not for sure on that, so I can't answer that question right now. It's somewhere between 3 days and a week.
And will we start to see an increase in A-RIDE training across local and state posts throughout the state?
Well, we've been implementing A-RIDE training for A-RIDE, not just for the state police, but for locals for quite some time now. I imagine that will continue. I imagine that everyone will benefit from having more officers trained in that. But it's already been, like I said, rolled out for a number of years. This is stuff that we already know for the most part.
And just to touch on, since we're already talking about recreational marijuana, it's still considered a drug. So research has shown that there has been an increase in e-cigarette use among teens. And how can we ensure that as the laws come out and facilities pop up to start selling, weed to people who are 21 and up, how can the public ensure that it's not getting into the hands of our young people?
Well, that's a tough question because we're a long way from getting to that stage where people are just buying it. But I think we can make some of the same assumptions about this as we do to other things such as alcohol, right? I mean, we as parents have a responsibility to educate our children about why it's a bad idea for them at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old to be drinking alcohol. We as parents have the same responsibility to educate our children about why they shouldn't be smoking marijuana until they're 21 years old. What are the physical effects? Maybe they'll find that they don't want to smoke marijuana at all, because of the effects. So, but it's our job as parents, first of all, to make sure our kids understand that stuff. Secondly, I'm sure you'll see Michigan State Police troopers, local deputies, school liaison officers adopting programs to talk to the kids about what are the potential problems with young people using marijuana. So that's kind of the prevention side of things. And then it's incumbent on us as a society to keep our eye out, right? And that's what happens now with alcohol. If someone believes that there's a case of someone using alcohol under the age of 21, they call us, we investigate, and hopefully can hold them accountable. I believe that will be much the same as things would work with marijuana.
With recreational marijuana being legal, the other part of that, law is that people can grow up to 12 plants.
That's correct.
How can law enforcement agencies control that? We know that you can only smoke it behind closed doors, so we can presume that people are going to have those plants behind closed doors. How can you know if someone has 12 or 20? Well,
we generally won't unless someone makes some kind of a complaint about someone being in violation of the law. Much like any other criminal act or civil infraction, unless we observe it or someone reports it to us, we don't know. And the same will hold true with that. But it's important to remember that most of the violations here are going to result in civil infractions. All right, so like traffic ticket style consequences. All right, fines, costs, those sorts of things. So I don't think you're going to see, if you're asking, I don't think you're going to see our drug teams, ramping up to try to find out how much marijuana everyone has in their house, unless there's a very large and obvious infraction. Remember that we're also going to have commercialized marijuana that will be governed by and watched closely by LARA, the licensing and regulatory affairs people in Michigan. So it's tough to answer that question other than to say we don't know when a crime is being committed or someone's doing something outside the law unless we observe it or someone reports it to us.
All right, Lieutenant House, those are all of my questions. I want to thank you for having this conversation with me.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.